so much.
And the tutoring as well, if you like. But yeah, I think that works. That works, takes care of that resources too. So. And sometimes it's not.
Great. So we are here for this workshop on narrative. And again, it's going to be a lot of me and you talking back and forth. We do have some online viewers, though. Looks like Rose and
Hey, awesome.
Rose? Oh, okay. Yeah, she was here earlier, actually. So if you're online, you can watch this PowerPoint. You can download it. But for us, I'm going to show it here on this right-hand screen and try not to stand in front of the camera too much. But essentially, narrative, as far as being a part of this class, I mean, it's rhetoric and narrative, understanding how stories work to a certain degree. And this third final project is all about narrating your own experience in the class. Mm-hmm. So having the ability to tell a story. Have you ever given directions to someone and or been given directions and they're not very easy to follow, or it's hard to give good directions?
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, it's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. Giving directions is really hard work because you have to be able to explain things relationally. You have to also presume things about other people, what they already know. So imagine when a car pulls up next to you and says, hey, how do I get to blank? And you think, well, where are we now? Who are you? What do you know about this city? And all of a sudden you have to kind of make a lot of guesswork. With writing, though, you have the opportunity and time ahead of time to brainstorm and make those connections easier for ourselves. So for our purposes, we're going to define what a narrative is and isn't. I guess plot twist, it's everything. Everything's narrative. But how narrative actually functions for academics, so inside the university as opposed to outside the university, storytelling to a certain degree, and then certain features of telling narrative, so the tone and the perspective of narration, because it kind of changes, right, depending on what we're doing. So the background on narrative. The simple background is we can take a dictionary definition of narrative, and it means to narrate. Well, that's kind of redundant. What does it actually mean to narrate? It means to recite, to replay, to explain how something works. It comes from the Latin naturare, meaning to recount. And I underline the word count here in the PowerPoint because when you think about it, really you're counting off in a narrative. In the beginning, this happens, then this happens second, then this happens third. And so narrative is always counting in order. Whether you disorder it, misorder it, reorder it, it won't matter. It's counting, it's time, it's chronology, whether it's achronological or not. So we think of different kinds of narratives. So what's the last film you saw? On the spot, I know.
The Wedding Date. It was like,
The Wedding Date? Is it a comedy?
No, well, I guess kind of. It's about a girl who.
Rom-com?
No, it's about a girl that like hires some professional guy to be her date to a wedding, so she's not embarrassed.
So would you say it qualifies as a story of some kind?
Yes.
You can follow it, it has a certain order, right? It's connected in some way?
Yeah.
Good. So fiction, nonfiction, film, memes, jokes, right? These are all kinds of stories. For our purposes in Module 3, you're doing an autoethnography, or if you're not in this class, you're in 1101, which means you're probably interviewing someone else and talking about their discourse group. So it's important to be able to tell their story for them. So either way, you're telling a story, your story or someone else's story. And it's a hard, and responsibility-wise, it's a hard thing to be responsible for, telling someone else's story. So when we talk about it in terms of why do we tell stories, we think about it for a lot of different reasons. There's a lot of research on this for evolutionary psychology, but you can look at, I think it's Robin Dunbar. He explains or argues that human speech comes out of gossip and grooming. The idea that monkeys used to groom themselves, and the ones who actually groom each other would get like oral feedback to say, no, groom me. And it grew out of this idea of, and gossip emerged, saying, oh, it's a good monkey, it's not a good monkey. He won't give you, he won't clean you. And then, you know, this trade going on back and forth. But survival, sharing information, saying that's a predator, that's not a, that is a predator, it's not a predator, that idea. So sharing secrets, think about raising a kid. The idea is you probably simplify things for a child that you already know that they don't know yet. Why? Why tell them things?
So that they can one day understand.
Yeah, perhaps, right? So you're basically helping them survive before they know they need to survive. Don't put a penny in a socket. Don't cross the street without looking. Well, they could figure that out, but what happens if they figure it out without knowing it first? Yeah, right? Survival. So this idea of summarizing or being able to tell a story and narrating is important to humans. It's part of the human condition. We use it to give meaning to life, to stories. Think about biblical texts or Quranic texts, things that are just important to people for stories. We find meaning in those things. Think about the stories of relatives, the stories of Holocaust survivors. These things resonate with people because there's something common among them, right? Something to find in them. Some sort of idea of comfort. For academics, it's not much different. Academics tell stories for similar reasons: to share information, to manipulate information, to control events, to give meaning to things. So, for example, Selena, your major is what?
Special education.
Wonderful. You have to be able to do something with information that not everyone else has to do. You have to be able to pass it on in a certain way. Yesterday, I tried to explain to a first grader why 110 is not written 1010. Because for her, it seemed like 109 is 109, so 110 is 1010. It's hard to explain what seems like simple information to somebody else. But if you start talking about the story of numbers and how 100 has 3 characters, 110 has to have 3 characters, you start getting those things. So special education, you have to be able to narrate, to tell a story to somebody to get them to understand things. So are you doing an academic writing in those classes?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
Well, I'm not right now.
But you will be, you
Yeah.
imagine. What kind of documents do you think you'd be writing?
Well, eventually I'll have to, I would want to write something of like profound, I don't know,
Sure.
something.
How about lesson plans though?
Oh, yeah.
So would you say lesson plans tell a story?
Yeah.
So how do you describe a student at the beginning of a lesson plan? The first day of class, in the semester or year?
Like background information things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do they know everything they're going to know at the end of the class?
No.
Right, it's kind of this building roman, this story of self-growth, right? So how about the last week of classes, the lesson plan? You kind of see a narrative arc, right? You can't get to the end without starting from the beginning and going through the middle. So the idea of narrative is always one of beginning, middle, end, beginning, middle, end. You can tell that story middle, beginning, end, it would be confusing. You can go end, middle, beginning. Again, it'd be confusing. Normally we go beginning, middle, end. Why, you think?
I think the flow of information.
It's easier, right?
Yeah.
So think about any TV show or film you watch, it's usually told chronologically, right? From the beginning, the middle, the end. Some are told in the middle of the middle, right? It starts with the action and kind of gives you background and goes back and forth. Are those as easy to follow when they thread back and forth past?
No, it'd be confusing.
It's confusing at times, right? There's a film like Memento, and if you've ever seen the film Memento, it's actually told from the end back to the beginning to the middle, so you don't really know what's going on. And you have to figure it out. It's kind of like a puzzle, and you're connecting the dots as you get to the end. So you may know the end of the text, but you don't know the whole narrative yet. It's different, right? Because the plot is not the narrative. Things have been misarranged. Imagine getting to the end of the alphabet and then having to go back to B, to N, to X, to C. It doesn't really work, right? So narrative in that way is confusing. So normally we order things in a very simple way. A, B, C, D, the song even, right?
Yeah.
Imagine trying to sing that song without having that right order. Would you get the same notes?
No.
Probably not. They're synced, right? So when we talk about narrative, we talk about who's talking. So for example, if you're in 1143, you've read Frederick Vogel's text on satire, the energy of satire. Who's talking in that text?
It was, which one was that? It was
Frederick
the
Vogel?
author, right?
Yeah, exactly. Really easy. How about if we talk about Swift's poem on Corinna, right? Beautiful young men going to bed. Who's the speaker in that poem?
It's him.
Is it the author? Does he ever say, "Hi, I'm Jonathan Swift. I'm going to tell you a poem today about Corinna"?
No, we don't really know. I guess we don't know who the author is.
So we don't know who's narrating. So it's kind of confusing. So generally speaking, when it comes to academic writing, we know who's writing. If it's Whimsy and Beardsley writing, it's them talking, quote unquote.
Yeah.
If it's Bogle writing, it's probably Bogle talking. He's the I in the text, right? He's addressing the you or the we of all of us, or the they. We see that perspective. So it's kind of confusing when we talk about poetry or something with a narrative, like a film, like, what did you say, The Wedding Date?
Yeah.
Right, so do we know who's telling that story? Is there a voice going over here? Is it Morgan Freeman's voice?
No.
Is there?
It's not a voice.
It's not a voice, it's just the screen talking without words, right? So the film is telling the story. So we have this third party that we don't ever get to see, this almost omniscient character, right? So oftentimes in education, we talk about first person, second person, third person storytelling. So first person, you talk and tell a story. Second person, I talk to you about a story. So you're going to work today. You see these things, and you can hear that pronoun "you" being repeated. That third person gets to be kind of confusing, right? Because it's limited, omniscient. So third person, right? So she's going to school today. She'll take classes today. They were outside playing when it started to rain. There's somebody outside of things. And that's when we get to this academic writing, perspective, narrating. So when you narrate your autobiography or this autoethnographic text, what do you imagine pronoun-wise you'll use? What perspective?
I, so first.
Yeah, because you wouldn't write about yourself as she. It'd be kind of confusing, right? You could, but it'd be confusing. Now imagine you were to write about me. How would you write about that?
You, second person.
Now, that's a good
Or
question.
it could be
Or,
third,
yes.
depending.
Right. On what? depending on what's
I guess.
I'm not changing. What's going to change if you call me you, and what's going to change if you call me he?
Maybe the perspective.
Yeah, the perspective changes. And when might you use you, and when might you use he?
I don't know.
Think about this. Who are you writing for? When you write
for me, like an auto, something auto would be me.
Right. Now, if you write for you, who are you writing for?
Them.
That person who's receiving it. How about if you write about he and him and she and her?
Just for anybody.
So the audience changes based on the perspective, right? That's an important aspect. So that's why when you write these summaries for an academic summary, you're using which perspective? Are you saying that I, when you're talking about Bogle?
No.
Are you talking about you because you're talking to Bogle?
No.
No, you're talking about he, right? Or Michelle and Aiden, or if you're talking about anything in the 1101 classes by G, you're talking about he, because where are you in relation to G? And you're writing to him?
Removed.
You've removed at least once, probably twice, right? Here's G in a text writing, or here's Bogle in text writing. Here's the text, and then here's you reading the text in which he's writing. So you're all the way removed. So it has to be he, it has to be she and they, right?
Mm-hmm.
It can't be you. It can't be I. It can't be I think, because you're not in the summary. So we get this idea of academics as being not dispassionate, but independent from and neutral. So in the summary, you can't use first and second pronouns. That makes sense because you're not in Bogle's standard view of satire.
Yeah.
We're not in Michelle and Aiden's idea about big data. So we don't get to be a part of those things. So the choice of pronoun makes sense relative to our purpose and our audience. So when we talk about perspective, we have to think about who's talking and to whom.
Okay.
And as soon as we understand those two questions, who is talking and to whom is that individual or individuals talking, all of a sudden we can pick the correct or best functioning pronouns. It could be any of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're writing an autoethnography, auto is just Latin for I. It's a Greek. Either way, it's you, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is very simple, I. So when you write these papers, it's I. When you write for 1101 for Tara's class, though, you're probably going to use he and she as opposed to you, because you're not writing about the other person whom you're interviewing. The other aspect is tense. And tense gets to be kind of confusing, and I get to use the whiteboard behind me. So if you're watching this in the video feed or after the fact, it might be useful for you to kind of close your eyes and imagine for a second. For you, though, Selena, you get to have the easy aspect.
Yeah.
We just talked about what I thought was a pretty savvy answer. You just told me that you are removed from the writing, right? You're not in the text. And I would argue that you're at least twice removed. So I mentally drew out an idea. If you have a text at the center of things, and in that text is an author who's writing out his or her ideas or their ideas, where are you in relation to all of that?
So I would be removed. I'm not in the text and I'm not the author.
Yeah, great. You're the reader outside, right? So if you're writing to the authors, you would call them a you, but you're not writing to them, you're writing about them. So you choose what kind of pronouns?
I'm writing about them?
Yep.
So it would be he?
Yeah, sure.
Or she? Or
He, she, they. Perfect. So it's really easy to see what's happening, right? You're talking about them. I'm talking about them. It's even the answer to the question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tense is the same idea. You ask two different questions. If I'm talking about something, when did the event take place or events, and who's telling me about those events? So for example, I'm going to use Bogle as the text. And it doesn't matter which text we're talking about because academics are all going to be consistent. Bogle's talking about Jonathan Swift, for example. He talks about a previous example. So now Swift lived in 1731, we know. Bogle's writing in 2001. Well, it's 100, 200, 270 years later. So we have the past tense and we have past tense, right? We have two past, because here's us in 2016, right? In the present?
Yeah.
So what's our relationship to the past? We're in the future.
In the future.
Yeah. So when we talk about any text, though, we always talk about it in the present tense.
Yeah.
So for example, in Bogle's text, The Standard View of Satire, he argues present tense. If we talk about Swift's text, the Beautiful Nymph Going to Bed, in Swift's poem, the narrator discusses Corinna, present tense, right? So we have this present tense happening. But what happens if there's a past tense in the present tense? That's the thing that we struggle with the most, right? We want to say Bogle wrote about these ideas. Swift discussed Corinna in the past. But we can use two verbs, right? So in Bogle's text, he discusses present tense, what Swift wrote about in the past. So it's perspective, right? Always in a present tense formula, talking about the past. So you can't get to the past without talking about the present first. And that's this idea here of differentiating, I click on that, right? Somewhere here now. Who's telling it and when did it happen? So for example, you walked here, I imagine to some degree, you didn't just drive up to the door here. Right. So if I were to ask you to talk about what you did earlier, for example, you would say, how did you get here today?
A car, and then I walked.
So you drove and you walked here, right?
Yeah.
So if I were talking about this now, I might say, McKinnon is discussing how Selena drove and walked. So this present tense, that gets us to the past tense because we have to negotiate that context. And so when we're narrating something, for example, you're going to write this paper on this autoethnography and talk about your past in the present, though, because now is when you're asking about it.
Yeah.
So a lot of what you're discussing, I see these things taking place because I analyzed in the past these things. So it's contextualizing those two actions. So speaking of getting here, what I'd like you to do is this. Take about 3 minutes. And if you have a computer, great. If you're typing or writing by hand or need a pen, I just want you to tell me how you got here today. And I'm not going to tell you what I mean by that. Because I know you're wondering, what do you mean? How did I get here? Did I drive? Did I bike? Do you mean here to college, here to this room?
That's what
I know, it's purposely vague. So I'm not going to tell you how many sentences to write. I'm not going to tell you how many paragraphs to put it into. I'm just going to say 3 minutes. You choose what all the content
how I got here. Okay.
Quote, how did you get here? And I'm not going to give you any more than that because there's a point to be made for this question being written the way it is. So take about 3 minutes to answer that question as best you can. And if you're watching, yeah, exactly. If you're watching at home or after the fact, just take a moment. And for the next 2 minutes or so, while things are otherwise silent here, you're thinking about how did I get here? Wherever you are. If you're at home in front of a computer, if you're at Starbucks in front of a computer, if maybe you're running somewhere and you have headphones in, I don't know. Think about that. How did you get to where you are right now? What do you think, Selena? You got an answer?
Yeah. Want me to read it?
Yeah, you mind?
Okay. After I graduated high school, I went to Idaho State. I was there for a semester and decided to move to Germany to work for the Air Force. Once my sister got pregnant, I decided to quit my job and move to Florida to help. When I arrived to Florida, I wanted to finish my education and enrolled in UNF.
Awesome. So you just told a story. It's really simple, right? We tell stories all the time. So you chose to answer that question in what perspective?
On well, it's from my perspective.
Yeah, so first person, right? It's from the first person. And if you had to imagine an audience for that text, how would you describe that audience? Are you writing to somebody or for somebody, about somebody?
I guess I was writing for myself, so.
Okay. Could it be read by anybody, understood?
I could, yeah.
Okay, so we have this first person perspective, and it's being written for anyone who wants to read it, right? So how about this? How about the tenses? What were the tenses used in that?
Well, in the past.
Or all of them?
No.
Any present tense or future tenses or anything like that? You can look at it, I'm sure it's I.
No, yeah, it's all I and it's all like ED.
Yes, it's all past tense, great.
Yeah, okay.
So you're telling a story just entirely in the past, and so you're tending to it, so it's consistent, right? It's not confusing because you don't go past, present, present. Why do you choose to be consistent? Or why did you not choose but end up being consistent?
Well, because it's something that's in the past. I'm not jumping in my story.
Sure. And so when we summarize a text academically, right, and we talk about things, we oftentimes don't attend to because it's not our story. So Vogel's story, right, his The Standard View of Satire, or Aiden and Michelle's Big Data piece, their text is all in the present tense. But when we talk about it, we almost sometimes narrate our experience of it. When I read Vogel's text, I thought these things about it. He seemed to be a difficult writer. Well, that is in the past, the experience of the text, right? Those are past tense things. In the text, though, it's all present tense because it's all still happening. You can open that essay anytime. So when you're thinking about your writing, you're trying to make sure it's consistent and easy for the reader to follow. So oscillating or switching back and forth between past and present, you risk confusing the reader. If you can be consistent in your tense and consistent in your perspective, not go I, you, we, they, and go back and forth, your reader will appreciate that because it's consistent and easy to follow. Imagine if I gave you directions right now and I said, you know, when you go out the door, I'm going to go up the stairs, and then once you get upstairs, I'd like Babe to go down the hallway. I can't just switch like that because I'm switching my subject, and I'll lose you. But if I'm consistent and I say, when you go out the door, and then you go up the stairs, and then you turn left, you, second person, consistent, easy to follow. And that simple rule is all you're looking to use to govern writing a summary, writing a paper. It doesn't matter. Consistency is key for your reader's sake. As long as you can do that, you can narrate any story. Pick a fixed point and don't shift. So when you write a summary, you're writing from the outside every single time. You don't want to zoom into the text and become Vogel. Are you Frederick Vogel?
No.
No, you're not, right? So if you started talking about satire and say, well, you know, I think satire is something that was defined as this. And if we think about this, all of a sudden you're inhabiting that perspective of Vogel that's not available to you. You're on the outside and you can say zoomed out because here's me, David, talking about Vogel, right? So I would talk about it from the outside. I see Vogel writing, he's talking about satire. Next he moves on to discussing examples of satire. Now he's finally discussing this, and me on the outside always seeing a him. Not an I, not a you, that third person. So consistency is key. Whether it's you or I or we, have to be consistent. Of tone in terms of perspective and tense. So if you mind those two things with narrative, it becomes so much easier to talk about those things. Whether you do them chronologically or achronologically or mixed. Ideally chronologically for most of our writing, but as long as you're tending to those two aspects of tone, your reader will be able to understand what you're saying. That's the idea of narrative generally for this purpose. So for your autoethnography or for 1101, if you're talking about how to interview someone and discussing the discourse community, you want to be able to situate things from the outside. Your reader, your audience doesn't know what you know, therefore it has to be independent. You need to write about it from an unbiased way, so that sense of neutrality, right? You can't have that bias. And if you can attend to those two aspects, your tone will come off as being less subjective, more objective, easier to follow, and consistent. And so that's the general takeaway from this. And hopefully that answers most questions about what narrative is for our purposes.